Betrayal hurts the most when it comes from the one you trusted completely. And Madison Cole learned that lesson in the harshest way possible among the polished skyscrapers of Chicago's elite. She had once stood proudly beside her husband, Nathaniel Cole, celebrated as one of the city's most influential self-made millionaires. From private jets to diamond-studded galas, their love story had every piece of a modern fairy tale, until it crumbled behind closed doors. When Madison found out she was pregnant, she truly believed it would fix everything, that it would heal the cracks in their unusual marriage. But instead of the joy she imagined, she was met with icy detachment, and soon after, a mistress. Nathaniel's betrayal wasn't subtle. It was loud, cruel, and humiliating. Gossip columns shouted, rumors flew, and while he flaunted his new lover through Europe's most luxurious playgrounds, Madison was left alone to face heartbreak and pregnancy by herself. But that was far from the end. Just when everyone assumed she would fade quietly into scandal, Madison returned not as a victim, but as a force of nature. Arm in arm with Adrienne Vaughn, Nathaniel's most relentless business rival, she stepped back into the spotlight, not as a wife, but as a woman taking her voice back. And when Nathaniel spotted her at a gala, radiant and fearless, the grip he once held over her life shattered instantly. What follows is a story of revenge tangled through courtrooms and marble ballrooms, of calculated moves behind tailored suits, and of a woman who refused to be tossed aside in a city built on appearances and power. Madison will fight for justice, for herself, and for the future of her child, because some betrayals break your heart. Others spark wars. And this war is deeply personal. Nathaniel Cole was the perfect picture of a self-made giant, a name spoken in the same breath as Elon Musk or Bernard Arnault. He built an empire of high-end hotels, luxury boutiques, and prime real estate developments, each stamped with the Cole crest gleaming in gold. Beneath the crisp suits and polished charm, though, hid a cold ambition that many guessed was driven by pure ego and hunger for more. His eyes, a sharp steel blue, had once drawn in Madison Grant, who would later become Madison Cole. She came from a simple upbringing in a small Ohio town, never dreaming she'd one day mingle with Chicago's most powerful. They first crossed paths at a charity gala organized by the Gates Foundation, where Nathaniel's captivating presence and charitable image made him the star of the night. That night, Madison had been the star attraction. Overwhelmed yet completely mesmerized by the polished world Nathaniel pulled her into. From upscale art galleries to secretive members-only lounges, their whirlwind romance unfolded quickly and intensely. Nathaniel swept Madison off her feet with gestures that stole her breath away. Weekend getaways on private jets, front-row seats at elite fashion shows, and glittering jewels that promised forever. She was so sure he would keep every promise he made. She convinced herself that beneath Nathaniel's often distant, reserved exterior was a caring man who would treasure her deeply. Their wedding was a lavish celebration in a grand cathedral filled with Chicago's top names and power players. Madison felt like she was living out a fairy tale, even though at times she caught fleeting glimpses in Nathaniel's eyes of something cold and unreachable. Still, she brushed it off. Surely the weight of running an empire explained his detachment. Once things settled down, she thought, they would finally have each other back. In those first months of marriage, Madison did everything she thought the perfect wife should do. Standing proudly by Nathaniel's side at black-tie galas, mastering the art of hosting extravagant dinner parties, and learning just enough about mergers and stock options to hold her own in his world. She believed her role was to support him fully as he maneuvered through the ruthless corporate battlefield. But Nathaniel's gentle attention soon faded, replaced with late-night calls, endless meetings, and secretive dinners with would-be investors. Madison found herself spending more and more evenings alone in their sprawling penthouse high above the Chicago skyline, haunted by a growing fear that something precious was slipping through her hands. Yet she clung to hope. She told herself that once he reached his next big milestone, he would come back to her. And then, when Madison found out she was pregnant, her heart swelled with new dreams. Dreams that a baby would draw them close again, that the soft footsteps of their child would thaw the ice in Nathaniel's veins. Her heart pounded with both joy and fear as she rehearsed how to tell him. She chose an ordinary morning over breakfast. For just a flicker of time, she saw true surprise light up his eyes, maybe even happiness. But it vanished so fast, she almost doubted it was real. He simply nodded, mumbled something about booking an appointment, and went right back to scanning his stock reports. Madison convinced herself that his muted response was just how he processed big news. Surely, he needed time to let it sink in. So for the next few weeks, she forced herself to be patient, pushing away the urge to beg him for warmth he seemed unable to offer. But every day, the city's rumor mill hummed with whispers, sightings of Nathaniel dining with an unfamiliar red-haired woman at the most exclusive restaurants, and the faint trace of a foreign perfume clinging to his suit jacket, a scent Madison knew was never hers. One night, after countless hours of tossing and turning in their empty bed, Madison finally confronted him. Nathaniel came home around midnight, his face distant, his eyes lined with exhaustion, or maybe guilt. She laid out her suspicions, her voice shaking under the weight of heartbreak. But instead of denial or regret, he met her with icy irritation. He called her paranoid, brushing off the rumors as petty gossip spread by bored socialites. Yet the faint trace of another woman's perfume still clung to him, an invisible accusation he refused to answer for. Desperate for the truth, Madison crossed a line she never imagined crossing. She checked his phone records, betraying her own sense of trust. That was when she saw the name, Chloe Marquez, a rising fashion designer who had just graced the runways in Paris and Milan, whispered to have several wealthy backers funding her new label. The calls, the late-night messages, even dinner reservations she had never known about. Every piece confirmed an affair Nathaniel didn't even bother to hide well. When Madison confronted him again, this time sobbing, Nathaniel dropped any pretense of kindness. He told her flatly he no longer wanted to keep up what he coldly described as this charade of a marriage. He promised to take care of her and the baby financially, but never once mentioned love or loyalty. His words slammed into her like a wrecking ball, tearing apart every fragile hope she had clung to. In an instant, her whole world collapsed. She was pregnant and alone, bound to a man who cared more about protecting his polished reputation and lavishing attention on his new mistress than safeguarding the family they had created. Nathaniel Cole, once the prince of her romantic fairy tale, now revealed himself as the ruthless mogul the tabloids had long whispered about, a man who would abandon anyone the moment they stopped being useful. As days passed, Madison's despair spilled into the public eye. Scandal-hungry reporters feasted on every detail. Headlines blasted the story of the pregnant wife left behind, painting her and Chloe Marquez as rivals in a humiliating media circus. Strangers online speculated about Madison's mental state while paparazzi swarmed outside the penthouse, hoping to catch her at her lowest. She felt completely alone until her best friend, Rachel Ellis, stepped in. Rachel didn't flinch at the cameras or the rumors. She offered Madison a safe place far away from the flashbulbs and whispers. Even as her heart ached from betrayal, Madison felt a small, fierce spark of resolve light up inside her. She found a sharp, relentless attorney in Julia Whitman, a lawyer ready to fight tooth and nail for Madison's rights as a wronged wife, and determined to secure fair support for the child she carried. Slowly, Madison began to realize that Nathaniel's cruelty might eventually be his undoing. Lurking just beyond the chaos was another powerful player waiting for the right moment to strike. His name was Adrian Vaughn, Nathaniel's most formidable rival in the cutthroat world of Chicago's big business. Unbeknownst to Madison, Adrian had been watching the Cole empire crack from the shadows, carefully plotting his move. And in Madison, he didn't just see a woman desperate for help. He saw a key advantage to finally dethrone the arrogant tycoon who had once humiliated him in a crowded boardroom. Madison couldn't have guessed that her deepest heartbreak was about to drag her into the center of a brutal power war between two of the city's wealthiest titans. It would push her pain and her strength onto a public stage she had never imagined. Not long after moving into Rachel's guest room, Madison wrestled with the hollow feeling of abandoning the penthouse she once called home. But stepping back into that cold marble tomb haunted by Nathaniel's ghost and the ghost of Chloe's perfume was out of the question. Even so, her mind raced with worries about the days ahead. Her baby's future weighed on her constantly. Nathaniel wasted no time. Within weeks, legal documents arrived, papers meant to finalize the end of their marriage. The speed of it stunned Madison, who was still struggling to come to terms with her pregnancy. Nathaniel's attorney reached out to Julia Whitman with an offer, a generous payout so long as Madison agreed to keep quiet and disappear. Nathaniel clearly wanted to wash his hands of her completely and devote himself to Chloe Marquez and his relentless empire. "Are you prepared to accept this settlement?" Julia asked, her pen poised above her legal pad. A seasoned veteran in Chicago's nastiest high-society divorces, Julia's tailored suits and cool confidence were everything Madison wished she could mirror. Madison's throat tightened. She laid a protective hand on her belly. "I don't care about his money," she whispered. "I just want my child safe. But I'm not going to let Nathaniel walk away from his responsibilities." Julia allowed herself a faint, approving smile. "Then we'll make sure he doesn't. His adultery is grounds enough to fight, and if he wants to play dirty, we'll hit back just as hard. Photos, witnesses, whatever it takes." Meanwhile, the scandal only ballooned. New photos surfaced of Nathaniel and Chloe lounging on a sleek private yacht off the coast of Capri, her curves barely covered by a designer bikini, him relaxed with a glass of champagne in hand. The tabloids ate it up, setting these sun-drenched scenes against shots of a solemn, visibly pregnant Madison walking out of a prenatal clinic. Slowly, public sympathy began to shift her way, though Madison felt little satisfaction in any of it. As for Adrian Vaughn, his name drifted through hushed conversations and whispered rumors. Rachel, whose interior design clients included some of Adrian's circle, quietly warned Madison that Adrian had a knack for sniffing out the weakest point in his rivals and striking with ruthless precision. Word had it, Adrian had once masterminded a hostile takeover of a promising tech startup that Nathaniel had his sights on, forcing Nathaniel to surrender control in a humiliating compromise. The fallout cemented a fierce personal grudge between the two men, transforming a business rivalry into a bitter vendetta. "Adrian's no saint," Rachel warned Madison one night, her tone serious. "He might see you as a pawn to get even with Nathaniel." Madison bit her lip. "If he does, I won't let him. But he's already offered Julia help with my case. Details about Nathaniel's hidden assets, backdoors we could use to corner him legally." Rachel gave a resigned shrug. "Then take whatever you can get from him. Just keep your walls up. Maddie, you've had enough heartbreak for one lifetime." Despite Rachel's warnings, Madison couldn't help but feel a thin thread of hope winding through her chest. She was trapped, her resources stretched thin, and Julia's entire strategy hinged on forcing Nathaniel to the negotiating table. If Adrian really had insider knowledge of Nathaniel's corporate weak spots, it might be the edge she desperately needed. Yet beneath that fragile hope lurked a sharper fear. What if she traded one cold puppet master for another? What if she let herself believe in a savior again, only to discover she'd been a means to an end all along? She hated how quickly her heart wanted to cling to the idea of rescue. So when Adrian invited her to lunch at an elegant hotel restaurant, pretending it was simply to discuss mutually beneficial matters, she agreed, though a knot of nerves churned in her stomach the entire drive there. More than once, she almost ordered the driver to turn around, but each time she pressed a palm over her belly and reminded herself, this wasn't about longing or pride anymore. It was about survival, for both of them. Adrian turned out to be every bit as magnetic as Nathaniel. Yet where Nathaniel's charm had masked a cold distance, Adrian's presence radiated quiet confidence, almost comforting in its steadiness. He stood to greet Madison, pulling out her chair with an old-fashioned courtesy. His dark eyes observed her closely, a mix of genuine curiosity and something gentler she couldn't quite place. She sensed immediately that beneath the polished manners was a calculating mind, one she couldn't afford to underestimate. Over a light lunch, they talked about her legal battle, her gnawing fears for the baby, and the sting of watching Nathaniel flaunt Chloe like a trophy in every tabloid spread. Each word tasted like vulnerability, but Madison forced herself to keep speaking, because to stay silent had nearly destroyed her once before. "You're probably wondering why I'm even doing this," Adrian said after a pause, swirling the untouched sparkling water in his glass. "Let's just say your husband, soon-to-be ex-husband, has crossed me more times than I care to count. If there's any payback to be had, I'd rather see it come through you." Madison let out a slow breath, fighting to keep her voice steady. "I don't want revenge," she murmured, her words catching in her throat. "I just want this nightmare to be over. I want to protect my child, nothing more." His gaze softened, the edge in his expression easing for a moment. "That's fair. But in this city, protecting yourself usually means fighting back. And sometimes you need powerful allies to stand a chance." She studied him carefully, trying to read the full truth behind his calm exterior. "Are you offering me an alliance?" Madison asked, her voice calm but her heart pounding. Adrian tilted his head slightly. "Call it whatever you like. I have resources, influence, and an entire circle of people who would love nothing more than to watch Nathaniel Cole get knocked off his pedestal. If helping you achieves that, then we both get exactly what we want." When Madison left that lunch, she felt oddly steadied. Adrian's motives were far from selfless, but his offer threw her a lifeline she couldn't afford to ignore. Yet as she stepped into the cab afterward, the city lights flickering against the window glass, she pressed her hand to her chest and whispered a quiet promise to herself. Never again would she surrender her freedom to another man's agenda, no matter how tempting it was to believe he might be different. Before long, she found herself leaning heavily on the insider intel Adrian's connections supplied. Everything from leaked financial reports to quiet murmurs of angry shareholders ready to turn on Cole Enterprises. Piece by piece, Julia Whitman built a solid case that would guarantee Madison not just fair support, but uncontested custody of her baby, something Nathaniel would struggle to undermine. Nathaniel, of course, didn't back down without a fight. He fired back with a barrage of legal motions, painting Madison as unstable, too overwhelmed by her pregnancy to be a fit parent. His lawyers implied that if she was so fragile, custody might be better in the hands of someone stronger, Nathaniel himself. The insult burned deeper than she expected. Night after night, she lay awake, one hand on her belly, promising her baby that no court in the city would ever tear them apart. The gall was almost laughable. Even as he flaunted Chloe Marquez across magazine covers, he had the nerve to challenge Madison's worth as a mother. Then came whispers about Chloe's less-than-sparkling business dealings, rumors of defrauded investors, shady offshore accounts, and double-crossed suppliers in Europe. The day Adrian told Madison about it, his grin was sharp enough to draw blood. He smelled an opening, and if the gossip proved true, Nathaniel's reputation could spiral even faster, both in public and in the boardroom. But even that scandal would pale compared to what was about to hit. A few weeks later, a cream-colored envelope landed at Rachel's apartment. An invitation to the Black and White Gala, Adrian Vaughn's annual, no-expense-spared gathering that drew Chicago's most powerful under one roof. With the city still buzzing over Nathaniel's scandal, Adrian's ball would be the ultimate stage to reveal shifting loyalties and show the world that Madison Cole was far from abandoned. When Rachel handed her the invitation, Madison's stomach flipped. Going as Adrian's guest would be a bold declaration. She was done shrinking under Nathaniel's shadow. "Are you ready for that kind of spotlight?" Rachel asked, sorting through a rack of gowns that might still flatter Madison's growing belly. Madison pressed a palm against her stomach, feeling the baby's subtle movements beneath her hand. She thought of sleepless nights, cruel headlines, and the slow, undeniable truth that she owed it to herself and her child to stand tall. No more secrets, no more hiding. If Nathaniel wanted a war, she would give him one, on her terms. "I'm done hiding," she said softly but firmly. "If Nathaniel wants to corner me, he can watch me fight my way out in front of everyone." And so, as the countdown to the Black and White Gala began, the stage was perfectly set. Backed by Adrian's power and Julia's ironclad strategy, Madison braced herself to confront Nathaniel publicly for the first time since he'd betrayed her. In the glittering chaos of Chicago's most exclusive gathering, secrets would crack open, grudges would reignite, and one pregnant woman's courage would finally take center stage. Would be tested like never before. Gossip swirled at full speed as the Black and White Gala drew near. Speculation over who would show up with whom, which fashion houses would outdo themselves with custom designs. But above all, the question on everyone's lips: would Nathaniel Cole and his scandalous mistress, Chloe Marquez, dare to show their faces at an event thrown by Adrian Vaughn himself? Meanwhile, Madison stood in front of a mirror in Rachel's cozy apartment, wearing a flowing black gown that draped beautifully over her baby bump. Rachel, ever the perfectionist with an eye for elegance, had helped tailor the dress to blend sophistication with comfort. Madison's heart drummed a nervous beat at the idea of stepping back into the spotlight, especially when the public was hungry for fresh fuel in the saga of the cold millionaire who dumped his pregnant wife. Rachel fussed with the final details, then stepped back, nodding in satisfaction. "You look breathtaking," she declared, fastening a simple diamond necklace around Madison's neck. "Understated but commanding, exactly what you need tonight." Madison drew a shaky breath. "I just hope I can hold it together if I see them," she murmured, meaning Nathaniel and Chloe. "Every time I think about what he did, how he threw us away." Her voice cracked, tears threatening. Rachel laid a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "You have every right to be furious, but tonight you show them you're not just a headline. You're stronger than all this, and you're not hiding anymore." Soon, a sleek limousine, courtesy of Adrian Vaughn, pulled up outside. The driver helped Madison inside, whisking her away to one of Chicago's most extravagant hotels, where the ballroom glittered with crystal chandeliers and gold-trimmed walls. A hush fell the second she stepped onto the red carpet, Adrian steady beside her, as photographers scrambled for the perfect shot. For the first time, Madison felt the wild mix of nerves and quiet defiance that came from willingly walking into the lion's den. Inside, the air pulsed with elegance and a crackling tension. Socialites, high-powered executives, and visiting nobility mingled over champagne, tuxedos, and couture gowns, brushing past velvet drapes. Madison felt every pair of eyes flick toward her, some curious, some pitying, some cold with suspicion from those loyal to Nathaniel or eager to brand her an opportunist. She kept her arm hooked firmly through Adrian's, refusing to flinch. Adrian worked the room with seamless charm, introducing Madison to influential figures who might have ignored her before. But tonight, the scandal, and her bold connection to Adrian, gave her an aura of mystery too tempting for many to resist. Whispers and side glances chased them across the ballroom as people fished for pieces of inside gossip. And then, amid the hum of string music and murmured deals, Chloe Marquez made her entrance, wrapped in a skin-tight, blinding white gown with daring cuts designed to turn every head in the room. She basked in the spotlight, tossing her fiery red hair back and flashing teasing smiles at the cameras. Rumor had it she'd come alone, no sign of Nathaniel anywhere. Madison's stomach tightened at the sight of the woman who had so carelessly torn apart her marriage. Then, like a sudden crack of lightning, Nathaniel Cole swept into the ballroom. Clad in a sharply tailored black tux, he radiated authority that turned every head in his path. Though he and Chloe had arrived separately, it took her only seconds to glide across the polished floor, slide her arm through his, and claim her place at his side for all to see. Cameras exploded in a fresh burst of flashes. A hush rippled through the room as Nathaniel's eyes locked on Adrian, and then on Madison. A small knot of onlookers instinctively drifted back, bracing for a confrontation. Madison's heartbeat pounded in her ears. She was close enough to see the muscle jump in Nathaniel's jaw, the way his gaze skimmed her black gown, then her rounded belly, and finally the protective hand Adrian rested at the small of her back. Chloe, draped on Nathaniel's arm, watched with a smirk that dripped with disdain. Adrian broke the heavy silence first, greeting Nathaniel with a smile that was pleasant yet edged with sharpness. "Cole, glad you could make it." Nathaniel's voice was as cold as cut glass. "I wouldn't dream of missing one of your little performances. And I see you've brought my—" He paused, his eyes flicking deliberately to Madison's pregnant belly. "My wife." Before Adrian could reply, Madison found her voice, steady despite the tremor in her hands. "Ex-wife. Very soon anyway," she corrected softly. "I assume Chloe's here to toast to that?" Chloe's painted smile hardened for a heartbeat before she leaned closer to Nathaniel, her tone dripping false sweetness. "Such a pity," she purred. "If you'd kept his attention where it belonged, darling, maybe you wouldn't be hanging on to his rival like a desperate prop tonight." A flash of hot anger flared in Madison's chest, But Adrian's comeback was faster and sharper. If anyone here is a prop, it's the one who jumped from backer to backer until she landed a bank account big enough to fund her closet and her lawyer's retainer. Chloe's cheeks flushed crimson, and Nathaniel's eyes narrowed into thin slits, his fists curling tight at his sides. For a charged second, Madison braced for a scene, cameras poised, donors holding their breath. But the weight of too many witnesses forced restraint. Nathaniel pivoted, tugging Chloe away with cold mechanical control. When they finally disappeared into the swirl of tuxedos and champagne, Adrian turned to Madison, worry creasing his brow. "You okay?" he asked, his voice low but firm. Madison realized she was trembling. She nodded slowly, forcing a deep breath into her lungs and refusing to let tears win. But none of them could have predicted what happened next. A man appeared out of nowhere, wearing an official badge stamped with investigations. He approached Chloe without a word, handed her a sealed envelope, then vanished before any reporter could swarm him. The entire exchange lasted barely a heartbeat, but the frozen look on Chloe's face told the whole story. She tore open the envelope, her eyes darting over whatever was inside. Despite her best attempt to hide it, a flash of raw panic twisted her perfectly composed features. And just like that, the gossip caught fire. Whispers hissed through the ballroom. Had Chloe been subpoenaed? Was she about to be dragged into an investigation for fraud? The polite curiosity around her curdled into pointed stares. Nathaniel quickly pulled her to a far corner, their urgent whispers swallowed up by the click of cameras eager to capture her unraveling. Meanwhile, Adrian gently guided Madison away from the vortex of scandal. "Come on," he murmured. "Let's get you some air." They stepped out onto a quiet terrace where the ballroom's chaos dulled behind thick glass doors. The city stretched wide and glittering below, the low hum of traffic grounding Madison as she clung to the balcony railing, willing her shoulders to relax. "You did good," Adrian said softly beside her. "You came here, faced him, faced both of them, and didn't flinch." Madison let out a shaky laugh, a sound tangled up in relief and lingering pain. "I don't know if I'll ever get used to this world. It's ruthless, so calculated." Adrian's expression turned thoughtful, shadows playing across his features. "You're right to be cautious, but don't sell yourself short. You're stronger than you think. Look at how far you've come, despite every dirty card Nathaniel dealt you." She drew in the crisp night air, feeling the baby shift gently inside her. A soft, steady reminder that she wasn't just fighting for herself anymore. "I do appreciate what you've done," she said, her voice steadying, "even if part of it is about taking him down." Adrian nodded, completely unashamed. "Hurting Nathaniel is a bonus. But make no mistake, I also see a woman who deserved better than being tossed aside. And if I can serve up a little justice alongside good business, well, that's a win in my book." For a moment, Madison swore she caught a glimpse of something genuine in his deep, observant eyes. This man standing beside her might be Nathaniel's fiercest rival, a shark in designer cufflinks. But in that quiet space between city lights and scandal, there was also a flicker of understanding she knew Nathaniel had never offered her. Adrian could still feel compassion. A spark Madison realized Nathaniel must have buried a long time ago. After a few moments of quiet on the balcony, they stepped back inside. Nathaniel and Chloe were nowhere to be found. Word spread quickly that they'd slipped out early, Chloe furious over whatever official notice she'd been handed. Meanwhile, the gala rolled on without missing a beat, strings swelling, champagne flowing, laughter ringing out from those blissfully unaware of the cold power games simmering just out of sight. For Madison, the night ended in a swirl of emotion. She had faced her estranged husband, seen the first real crack in Chloe's perfect image, and cemented her alliance with Adrian Vaughn. But maybe the most surprising part was the faint, unfamiliar sense of hope as she sank back into the waiting limo. No, the war wasn't over, not by a mile, but for the first time she believed she could win it, both in court and in the fickle court of public opinion. Outside, Chicago glittered like the star of its own show, and Madison allowed herself one small breath of optimism. She was bruised by betrayal, but she was far from broken. The next moves were Nathaniel and Chloe's to make, and whether they realized it or not, they were teetering closer to the edge than ever. The Cole Empire wasn't as invincible as Nathaniel liked to pretend. and Madison was no longer the wide-eyed girl who once fell for his promises. Beneath the polished surface of Chicago's elite, Madison discovered a tangled maze of shifting alliances, whispered deals, and silent power brokers more cunning than she'd ever imagined. Adrian was her guide through it all, a man who knew exactly which strings to pull, which secrets to leak, and which well-timed rumor could change everything overnight. With his backing, Madison began lifting her chin higher at charity galas and cocktail hours, where once she'd been brushed aside as just Nathaniel Cole's arm candy. Her pregnancy moved into the second trimester, and despite the constant tension, she found calm moments in quiet prenatal yoga classes and steady doctor checkups. A fierce protectiveness for her baby grew inside her like armor. Adrian offered more than once to join her for appointments, but his packed calendar and Madison's own need to stand strong alone kept most visits private. Still, he never failed to send reminders that she wasn't forgotten. A chauffeured ride, a bouquet of lilies, a simple text to check in. Nathaniel, by comparison, seemed consumed by rage that Madison had dared to stand beside Adrian at the gala. He turned up the legal heat, instructing his attorneys to challenge every single point of her case. Julia Whitman, armed with Adrian's insider tips, hit back twice as hard, exposing Nathaniel's hidden accounts and shady deals that painted him as far less untouchable than he wanted the world to believe. The press, feeding on every juicy leak, breathlessly covered every back and forth in the Cole versus Cole divorce battle. Meanwhile, Chloe Marquez's carefully curated brand began to buckle. Investors pulled out of her fashion line, spooked by rumors of fraud and shady bookkeeping. Magazines that once worshipped her image now kept their distance, hoping to avoid being dragged into scandal. For the first time, Madison saw the shine slip from the woman who'd so easily captured her husband's attention, and realized just how fragile Chloe's empire really was underneath all the gloss. Yet it was Adrian who quietly engineered a deeper, more devastating shift against Nathaniel. Through carefully planted rumors and discreet conversations in boardrooms and private clubs, he sowed doubt among Cole Enterprises' key backers. Some quietly pulled out, unwilling to stay tied to the storm of scandals swirling around Nathaniel's name. Shares dipped. The board of directors grew agitated, questioning if his messy private life had started to poison his once ironclad leadership. Amid these mounting cracks, Adrian invited Madison to dinner under the pretense of sharing new evidence Julia could use in court. The restaurant he chose perched high above the city, a hidden rooftop gem with sweeping skyline views, flickering candlelight, and a soft hum of hushed conversations that made the whole space feel private and weightless. Madison arrived tired but determined not to look it. She wore a simple, flowing ivory dress that skimmed over her now unmistakable baby bump. When Adrian saw her, he rose immediately to pull out her chair, his tone gentle and genuine. "You look beautiful tonight," he said, voice low but sincere. A flutter of nerves danced through her chest. This felt so different from the sharp transactional meetings of the past. Despite her guard, she couldn't deny it. Adrian's steady presence offered her a calm she hadn't known in years. She hated how comforting it felt to sit across from a man and not brace for cold lies or cutting words. Part of her wanted to sink into the warmth. The other part reminded her sternly that warmth could turn to ice overnight. They spoke first of legal tactics, depositions, hidden accounts, how far Nathaniel might push before settling. But as dinner lingered on, their words drifted to softer things. Childhood dreams, the strange pressures of the wealthy circles they'd both learned to survive, the heavy trade-offs that came with privilege. Madison caught herself surprised at how unfiltered Adrian could be, how he spoke of mistakes and ambitions with a quiet honesty that tugged at her carefully rebuilt armor. Every time he revealed a flaw or regret, she felt her defenses tremble. She told herself it was just the candlelight, just the city hum beyond the glass. But a tiny voice deep inside whispered that maybe, just maybe, some men didn't wear masks to hurt you. When dessert arrived, a rich chocolate soufflé, Adrian leaned forward, studying her face with those deep, knowing eyes. "You've changed," he said softly. "When I first met you, you were breakable. Now you walk in like no one can knock you down." Madison dropped her gaze, a small, real smile forming as she brushed a hand over her stomach. I didn't have much choice. My baby deserves strength, even if I have to fake it until it's real. The silence that settled between them was patient, warm, not awkward or heavy, but full of something neither one was quite ready to name. A question lingered between them like an unspoken challenge. Was this just another carefully played move by Adrian to secure Madison's trust, or was it something more genuine, an honest moment of connection neither had planned for? Madison felt her pulse quicken at the thought of letting her guard down again. She'd been burned once, scarred by placing her faith in a powerful man whose loyalty crumbled when she needed it most. Could she risk it a second time? The thought made her stomach twist with equal parts longing and dread. She wanted to believe she was wiser now, strong enough to keep her heart locked tight while accepting the help she so badly needed. Before she could untangle that thought, her phone buzzed sharply against the table. She shot Adrian an apologetic glance and unlocked the screen. Almost at the same moment, his phone lit up too. Side by side, they read the breaking alerts, astonishment spreading across both their faces. Chloe Marquez's fashion brand had just been slammed with a lawsuit by a syndicate of international investors accusing her of fraud and breach of contract. The potential payout demanded ran into tens of millions. Adrian let out a low whistle, setting his phone down. "This is bigger than I anticipated," he murmured. If Chloe's shady dealings lead back to Cole Enterprises bankrolling her, Nathaniel could be fighting for his entire empire in court too. Madison stared at him, a mess of emotions churning in her chest. On one hand, she couldn't deny the dark satisfaction of watching the woman who wrecked her marriage finally get dragged into the mud. But on the other hand, pity flickered through her. However undeserved. Nathaniel might be a cruel husband, but he was still the father of her child. Their baby would enter a world shadowed by scandal, corporate wars, and betrayal. She pictured tiny Gabriel one day asking questions about the father he might never fully know, a father whose greed and betrayal had scorched every bridge. A fresh wave of protectiveness surged in her veins. Adrian seemed to catch every unspoken thought flickering across her face. "Hey," he said quietly, leaning in just a touch. "If this is getting too ugly, say the word. We don't have to keep pushing, but this might be the break you need for a settlement that secures you and the baby. Nathaniel's going to be too busy scrambling for damage control to put up much of a fight now." Madison pressed a palm against her belly, feeling the tiny, reassuring movement inside her. She breathed out, almost to herself. "I need stability, and I need peace." She thought of late nights alone in her penthouse, crying into her pillow, wondering if she'd ever feel safe again. This was her chance to bury that version of herself forever. Adrian nodded firmly. "Then we see this through, together." Outside, a gentle wind tugged at the rooftop terrace, the Chicago skyline glittering around them. Distant lights reminding her how this city could swallow anyone alive if they didn't stand their ground. But in that hush, Madison felt a tiny spark of hope. Maybe, just maybe, she could carve out something quiet and safe for herself and her child amidst all this chaos. And if Adrian's hand helped her build that new life, maybe she could accept it without losing herself in the process. By the time dessert plates were cleared and they rose from the candlelit table, the lines of their fragile alliance had solidified more than ever. Madison hadn't promised Adrian anything beyond honest gratitude and strategic trust, but somewhere beneath the legal scheming, a faint ember of real trust flickered. Whether that warmth could survive the storms still gathering was anyone's guess. The night of the charity gala arrived wrapped in silk, secrets, and barely veiled tension. Chicago's elite packed themselves under a canopy of chandeliers and soft candlelight, laughter and speculation drifting through the grand ballroom of the historic Avalon Regency Hotel. Officially, they had come to raise millions for pediatric health care. But everyone knew the true allure wasn't the charity. It was the unspoken promise that tonight, gossip would sparkle just as brightly as the diamonds on every wrist. It was drama in its purest form. Madison stood before the tall mirror in her dressing room, her heart pounding so hard she could feel it in her throat. She wore a stunning teal gown that draped over her curves like liquid silk, cinched just above the gentle swell of her belly. Rachel had spent hours tailoring it by hand, making sure it honored her pregnancy without sacrificing an ounce of elegance. Her makeup was soft but intentional, her hair twisted into a loose chignon, with strands artfully framing her face like threads of quiet resilience. "You're luminous," Rachel whispered as she fastened a delicate necklace at Madison's collarbone. "He won't know what hit him." Madison managed a small smile but stayed silent. The thought of facing Nathaniel again, after the public betrayal, the threats, the media circus, twisted her stomach into knots. But she wasn't the same woman who used to wait by the window for him to come home. Tonight, she would step into the lion's den. Not as prey, but as a woman who had found her roar. Adrian Vaughn arrived right on time, dressed in a sleek black tuxedo, accented with subtle silver embroidery that caught the light when he moved. He said nothing when he saw Madison, only offered his arm, his eyes warm with silent pride and something almost protective. The drive to the gala passed in quiet calm. Adrian's presence beside her felt like an unspoken shield against whatever the night might throw at them. When their limousine finally pulled up outside the Avalon Regency, the rush of camera flashes turned the entrance into a strobe of white light. Reporters were already gathered, hungry for a headline, and Madison knew she'd own tomorrow's front page. She stepped out slowly, one hand resting firmly on Adrian's arm, her posture regal, her chin lifted just enough to remind the world she wasn't broken. The instant her heels touched the crimson carpet, the crowd fell into a hush, then exploded in murmurs and the rapid-fire pop of shutters. "That's her. Nathaniel Cole's ex. She's glowing. Look who's with her. Adrian Vaughn brought her? My God." Inside the ballroom the air was charged, almost humming. Golden light spilled like honey from glittering chandeliers, piano notes drifted in soft waves from the corner, and waiters glided through clusters of Chicago's wealthiest elite with flutes of champagne. Madison stayed anchored at Adrian's side as he navigated the throng with practiced grace, pausing for polite exchanges with old allies and hidden enemies alike. He made introductions easily, weaving Madison into conversations that left no doubt. Tonight she was not a cast-off ex-wife. She was someone worth standing beside. "She looks unbelievable," someone hissed by the bar. "I can't believe she'd show her face here, especially with him." But Madison didn't waver. Her eyes scanned the glitter and the whispers, searching for the storm she knew was waiting. And then she found it. Nathaniel Cole. He appeared in the doorway like a sudden rumble of thunder, every inch of him sculpted into cold control. An immaculate charcoal tuxedo, hair slicked back, jaw locked tight, his eyes swept the ballroom with the calm cruelty of a predator, and then, inevitably, locked with hers across the sea of onlookers. His gaze narrowed the instant he spotted Madison, then dipped to the hand Adrian rested lightly against the small of her back. A muscle in Nathaniel's jaw twitched once, hard, before he forced his eyes away. But not quickly enough for Madison to miss the flicker buried beneath that polished mask. Rage, jealousy, maybe even a shred of regret. All around them, the glittering crowd shifted almost imperceptibly, a collective hush settling as the invisible line between them grew thinner and thinner. Adrian, sensing the confrontation brewing like a storm, guided Madison smoothly through clusters of curious onlookers. She shook hands, murmured polite greetings, but her focus stayed pinned to the inevitable collision waiting for her near the center of the room. It happened by the champagne fountain. Nathaniel appeared out of the swirl of sequins and murmurs, alone, his glass of whiskey barely touched in his hand. He stopped a breath away from them, the soft hum of the piano behind them seeming to drop in deference to the charged silence. "Madison," he said, voice low and tight as wire pulled too hard. Then with a stiff nod, "Vaughn." "Cole," Adrian replied, his tone measured, unreadable. The three of them stood there, locked in an electric triangle, while the ballroom's chatter faded into strained eavesdropping. Every nearby glance flicked their way. "You've grown bold," Nathaniel continued, his eyes sweeping over Madison's teal gown, pausing deliberately at the gentle curve of her stomach. "Parading yourself around town, basking in this little circus, I suppose you like the attention." Madison drew in a controlled breath. "It's a charity gala, Nathaniel. Not everything revolves around you." His laugh cracked brittle at the edges. "You used to be discreet. Now you flaunt yourself on the arm of my rival, like some badge of defiance." "She's not flaunting anything," Adrian interjected evenly, moving just a fraction closer. She's standing in her own light, something you tried to snuff out every chance you got. Nathaniel's glare snapped to him, colder than ice. You think this is a win? You think clinging to her makes you better than me? I don't need to think it, Adrian said, a blade of calm steel in his words. I only need to stand back and watch you unravel. Before Nathaniel could spit a reply, a ripple of sudden movement sliced through the charged air. A man in a dark suit, some official courier, stepped up quietly, pressing an envelope marked with a heavy legal seal into the hands of a startled server. The server, eyes darting between the three titans before him, handed it directly to Nathaniel. Madison recognized the insignia immediately. Court papers. Maybe a subpoena, maybe the first step toward an indictment. Nathaniel ripped it open, color draining from his face as his eyes scanned the lines inside. His fingers clenched tighter and tighter around the page, the paper crumpling under the strain. For the first time, Madison watched him falter, truly, unmistakably shaken. She didn't have to read over his shoulder to know Chloe's name was woven deep into whatever ruin now threatened to drag him down. Maybe it was bank transactions, maybe it was deeper evidence. Whatever it was, it hit Nathaniel hard. Without a single word, he spun on his heel and stalked away, leaving a stunned hush in his wake. The tight tension shattered like glass, and Madison exhaled, realizing only then how long she'd been holding her breath. Adrian's hand stayed steady at her back. You all right? He murmured. I will be, she whispered back, eyes fixed on the ballroom doors where Nathaniel had disappeared. I think he finally knows what it feels like to lose. Adrian's mouth twitched into a half-smile, a flicker of quiet pride in his eyes. He underestimated you. As the evening unfolded, Madison drifted through the glittering crowd with a calm that felt brand new. She'd walked into that ballroom braced for fear, but she was leaving wrapped in something stronger. Power. Not the brash kind wielded in boardrooms, but the silent kind forged by surviving what was meant to break you. By the time the gala ended, Chicago lay draped in soft city stillness. In the back of the limo, Madison watched streetlights and skyscraper crowns blur into a drifting river of gold and silver. You were brilliant tonight, Adrian said, his voice quiet but certain. She turned to him, a small, genuine smile tugging at her lips. Thank you for standing beside me. I didn't stand beside you, he said, shaking his head once. I just followed your lead. Outside, the city murmured with distant horns and secrets. Madison leaned back into the plush seat, one hand resting on her belly, the other folded calmly in her lap, steady and sure, holding her future tight. In the weeks that followed, the coal scandal exploded into the headlines with a force no one had fully predicted. Investigators tore through Chloe Marquez's fashion empire, exposing doctored sales numbers, shady offshore accounts, and loans that raised more questions than answers. Not every dollar pointed straight to coal enterprises, but there were enough tangled lines to pull Nathaniel deep into the fallout. Almost overnight, the titan everyone thought untouchable faced an avalanche of legal headaches and corporate betrayal. Shareholders panicked, brand partners fled, and his once loyal board whispered about reckless judgment and irreparable damage to the company's reputation. Adrian, for his part, worked the back channels with quiet precision, feeding doubt into the right ears, highlighting every lurid headline as a warning flag. One by one, major investors cut ties, leaving the once mighty coal name teetering on a precipice. Madison focused on what mattered most, her baby. With Julia Whitman's sharp guidance, she navigated the final steps of the divorce. The relentless negative press left Nathaniel's legal team cornered. There was no way to sell him as a reliable father to a judge when the world saw him as a man who traded family for scandal and chaos. Under growing pressure, Nathaniel's lawyers caved at last, offering a settlement that ensured Madison financial security for the rest of her life and robust child support without any further drawn-out battles. Julia accepted on her behalf, closing the door on a chapter Madison had never imagined surviving with her head this high. Ensuring every term was locked in airtight, Madison signed the final divorce papers without ceremony. There was no sense of victory in the neat rows of signatures or the promises of financial security. No amount of money could erase what betrayal had carved into her. But there was relief, deep and almost weightless, as if her spirit finally slipped free from invisible chains. With the ink dry, she could welcome her baby into the world without the constant shadow of Nathaniel's interference. She felt it deep in her bones. She would never again be a woman waiting by a door for a man who never came home. Meanwhile, Nathaniel faced an emergency board meeting that would decide if he'd keep the CEO seat he'd once ruled like a king. Rumors of misappropriated funds swirled like vultures overhead, and legal subpoenas targeted not just Chloe Marquez, but also any coal executives who might have helped funnel money her way. Stocks sank lower with every fresh headline. In a final grasp at damage control, Nathaniel asked Madison to meet him privately at a discreet hotel bar. She agreed, partly to see what scraps of nerve he still had left, partly to make sure every last loose end was tied off for good. When she arrived, he was there alone, hunched over a half-finished glass of bourbon. Heavy shadows rimmed the sharpness of his once icy blue eyes. His posture sagged, the ironclad confidence that had once owned boardrooms nowhere in sight. She almost didn't recognize him. This was no longer the man she once thought unbreakable, just a man undone by his own hand. "I need your help," he began, his voice raw from nights without sleep. "These allegations about Chloe, the board's convinced I'm involved. If you just make a statement, say Coal Enterprises always treated you well." Madison stared at him, stunned by the sheer nerve of it. "You want me to lie?" she asked, the words trembling somewhere between disbelief and anger. "Pretend you didn't humiliate me in public? Pretend you didn't abandon me while I was pregnant? Parade your mistress through every gala in Europe?" Nathaniel's hand tightened around his glass, knuckles white. "It's not." He stopped, shame flickering in his eyes. "This is about the company. Its survival affects our child's future, Madison." Rage simmered up her spine, fierce and clean. "Don't you dare mention our child now. Where was this fatherly concern when you threw us away for Chloe?" Her voice caught, not with weakness but with the fury she'd swallowed for far too long. Silence swelled between them, dense with words neither could say out loud. Nathaniel's shoulders slumped. For a breathless moment, the mask cracked, leaving only a man who knew exactly how badly he'd lost. "I made mistakes," he whispered, the admission landing like a stone in her chest. "Big ones." Madison swallowed hard. Images of their wedding day flickered behind her eyes, promises that had turned to poison. And for one fleeting heartbeat, she thought she saw something real in his regret, but it was far, far too late for that to matter. The damage Nathaniel had inflicted on her heart and on his own carefully crafted legacy couldn't be undone. "I'm sorry," Madison said softly, shaking her head. "I won't stand up for you. You made your choices, and you have to live with them now. I'm not risking my own name to save yours." Her voice didn't tremble. This time it rang clear, carrying every shard of pain he'd once dismissed as weakness. Nathaniel's eyes drifted closed, the defeat carving deep lines into a face that once radiated untouchable power. Madison stood up, her emotions a complicated knot of pity, anger, and a final, gentle grief for what they'd once imagined together. Once, she dreamed of forever by his side. Now she saw only a broken man drowning in the wreckage he'd made for himself. Part of her mourned that girl she used to be, the one who would have given him anything for a scrap of love. She knew now she owed him nothing. Without a backward glance, she left him sitting alone in that dim hotel lounge. Days later, headlines erupted. Nathaniel Cole removed as CEO pending investigation. Business channels dissected the downfall of the cold, self-made tycoon and whispered that Adrian Vaughn was quietly circling, ready to snap up pieces of the coal empire at bargain prices. Analysts called it poetic justice. As for Chloe Marquez, her glamorous brand crumbled under the crush of lawsuits and mounting fraud charges. Gossip sites reported she'd vanished to Europe, dodging subpoenas and trying to cling to the scraps of her fleeting fame. Soon enough, the tabloids found fresh scandals to devour, leaving her as nothing more than a cautionary footnote in someone else's cautionary tale. Through all the noise, Madison moved forward quietly. She gave birth to a healthy baby boy on a soft spring morning surrounded by Rachel, Julia, and a tight circle of true friends. She named him Gabriel, a name that felt like a breath of hope, a bright beginning. When the nurse placed him in her arms, all the bitterness, betrayal, and bruised pride slipped away, muted by the sound of her son's tiny heartbeat and his perfect, peaceful sleep. Sunlight streamed through the hospital window, catching dust motes that floated like tiny stars in the quiet room. In that quiet, she made a silent promise to Gabriel. He would never inherit her scars, only her strength. Nathaniel, busy fending off corporate wolves and mounting lawsuits, sent only a short, stiff congratulatory message. He didn't come to see them. And as Madison cradled her newborn against her chest, she felt no sting of disappointment, only relief. She was free to build Gabriel's future on her own terms, without the long shadow of a broken marriage. A few days later, Adrian arrived at the hospital, bearing a simple bouquet of pure white roses and a beautifully carved wooden bird for Gabriel's nursery. His presence was calm, unhurried, and when he gazed down at her baby, the warmth in his eyes caught Madison off guard. A quiet kindness she hadn't realized she'd missed so deeply. He didn't come with declarations or promises of grand romance, just steady support and a promise to stand by her and Gabriel, no strings tangled in hidden motives. It was enough, more than enough. She didn't crave fireworks or rushed vows. For now, she was content to heal, to savor every small milestone and drowsy smile from her son. And when Adrian visited, their once strategic conversations gently gave way to soft laughter, baby gurgles, and easy moments, notes in a quiet, new melody of life Madison had fought so hard to earn. Over the following months, Madison found a deep, unexpected contentment in the gentle chaos of motherhood. She settled into a warm, sunlit townhouse, tucked away in a quiet Chicago neighborhood, where Gabriel's laughter echoed through bright rooms, far from the reach of paparazzi lenses. Thanks to Julia's meticulous work, Madison's settlement remained secure, giving her the freedom to raise her son without ever needing Nathaniel's approval or permission. Every night, as she checked the locks and peeked into Gabriel's crib, she felt a steady pride she'd once thought impossible. She was enough. Just her. On her own terms, she accepted a flexible consulting role at Adrian's firm, part-time, lending her insight to public relations and new philanthropic projects. It gave her a purpose that balanced perfectly with afternoons in the park and bedtime lullabies. In that delicate balance of work and soft domestic moments, Madison found the kind of independence she once believed would always be out of reach. She learned to trust her own voice again, in conference calls and quiet nursery feedings alike. Her days became a rich patchwork of Gabriel's first giggles, stroller walks under golden leaves, and thoughtful meetings where her ideas were heard and valued. The scars of betrayal lingered in quiet corners of her heart, but they no longer defined her. They reminded her instead of what she'd survived, and how brightly she now stood in her own light, not as someone's discarded wife, but as a woman wholly reborn in the warmth of her son's love and the quiet certainty that her future was hers alone to shape. Meanwhile, the cold, untouchable man who once held her life in his hands watched his empire crumble piece by piece. Nathaniel's mistress vanished into obscurity overseas. His former allies abandoned him the moment the scandals poisoned his reputation. His board, once obedient, pushed him into irrelevance. The same city that had once bent at his feet now whispered his story as a warning. How arrogance and cruelty could topple even the most gilded throne. And Madison? She carried on, her chin high and her heart steady. A testament that real wealth wasn't measured by fortune or powerful last names, but by the resilience that endures betrayal and the quiet courage to build anew. She found her voice, her freedom, and above all, a future blooming with gentle mornings, laughter-filled afternoons, and a little boy whose every heartbeat reminded her why she'd fought so fiercely to stand tall again. She no longer feared the past creeping back. She had learned how to lock every door it tried to open. Her bond with Adrian grew, not through rushed promises, but through slow, respectful friendship that never demanded more than she was ready to give. He remained at her side, a quiet anchor, proof that kindness can bloom in the rubble of chaos. Sometimes, when she caught his eyes lingering on her and Gabriel, she wondered if one day that steady warmth could become something deeper. But for now, she was content to let life unfold at her own pace. Justice, Madison learned, had many faces. Sometimes it looked like courtroom wins. Sometimes like whispered rumors that toppled tyrants. And sometimes justice was simply the soft, perfect weight of her son sleeping soundly against her chest while the world outside carried on. Thank you for joining us on this winding journey through betrayal, heartbreak, and hard-won redemption. Madison's trials remind us that no empire, no matter how high its walls, can withstand the corrosive force of cruelty and deceit forever. As Nathaniel Cole's once mighty legacy collapsed under the weight of his own choices, Madison rose, steadier, stronger, and more determined than ever to shape a life rooted in resilience, compassion, and fierce hope for her child. Her story and the unexpected loyalty of Adrienne Vaughn proves that help can come from unlikely places, and that even in life's darkest storms, a determined heart can carve out the sun. So the story ends here, dear friends. And yet if you're still with me right now, at this hour, I know in my heart it's because some part of Madison's fight, her heartbreak, or her quiet victory has touched something inside you too. Maybe you, like her, have carried wounds that no settlement could fix. Maybe you know how betrayal can bruise the softest parts of your soul, and how hard it is to believe you can be whole again. Madison's journey reminds us that healing is not a quick fix. It's the slow art of choosing yourself every single day. It's true what Rumi said, "The wound is the place where the light enters you." Madison's scars didn't vanish, but they became the proof that she survived, learned, and rose stronger than every lie whispered about her. If there's one truth to carry with you tonight, let it be this: you do not need someone else's permission to stand tall again. Real freedom is claiming your voice when the world tries to drown it out. Real wealth is a life where you get to lock the doors on old pain and open windows to laughter instead. Look at Madison. Once discarded, now blooming in a quiet house filled with her child's giggles and her own steady heart. She teaches us that sometimes the best revenge is not revenge at all, but peace. So, if you stayed till the very last line, thank you for giving this story and yourself the gift of time. If it moved you, if it reminded you that storms pass and the sun returns, please like, share, and subscribe to this channel. Somewhere out there, another soul might need to hear this too. That even betrayal can't drown a spirit determined to heal. Take care tonight, dear friend. May you carry Madison's courage into your own tomorrow.